Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we are going to talk about boys and their toys. When I was a kid, I used to love playing with Matchbox cars, Tonka trucks, any other cool cars and trucks that could do anything and go anywhere. I actually remember this one toy truck I had called the Animal. It was a battery-operated toy car, but it had these huge rubber tires with claws that came out that gave them extra traction, and it could basically go anywhere. And so, when we grow up, whether we're adults or we're children, we still love our toys. And as kids, we get to use our imaginations to create adventures with these toys. But when we grow up to be adults, we get to turn our dreams into reality, which is the coolest thing. And so our guest today is Will Berkeley, and he knows a thing or two about using toys to create adventure. He is a Charlotte native. His family has been here for many generations. He's the father of four, a general contractor, the owner of Berkeley Construction Management, and he provides business owners with construction management representation. So my first exposure to Will was as the dad of one of my daughter's friends, and I took special note because he has the coolest truck. It is a 4Runner with big, chunky tires, all sorts of accessories, and it looks like it could go anywhere. So it's just like the Animal that I had when I was a kid. So as luck would have it, Will and I have become friends. And when he's not building things, he is an adventurer, and he has taken that awesome truck on many adventures through a recreational activity that has been called Overlanding. And he is here today to tell us about that. So with that, Will, welcome to the campfire, my friend.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Sat around the campfire with you once before out in the wilderness, and it was great. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to do it again.
We did, man. We went backpacking out in Linville Gorge just a couple of weeks ago and had a great experience. And I got to hear some of these stories firsthand. I'm so excited to share with the listeners. So I want to start just going straight to overlanding, because that might be a term that listeners might not even be familiar with. Can you just kind of give us some context? What is overlanding?
Well, quite frankly, it was a word that I had never heard either when I started this adventure and building this toy. But overlanding is traveling overland, particularly with the vehicle and all the things that you need to go survive and have an adventure. So that could be a mild adventure or a really great adventure. There's a lot of car camping and exploring and going somewhere that you've never been before involved. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful time.
Yeah, super fun. And, I can say, like, anybody just Google the word overlanding and go to the images pages, and it's just riddled with just awesome looking trucks and cool experiences of just being anywhere, like being out in the woods and just cutting through terrain that a regular car just wouldn't get through. So it's super awesome. I made a big deal in the intro about your truck. It is a badass truck, Will.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
And before we jump into the adventure that you actually took us on, do you mind, like, how did that truck sort of come to be for you?
Well, I have always been an adventurer, and I've always done outdoor things. And I've always had toys that allow me to do adventure. So I have a whitewater raft and several whitewater kayaks and a canoe. And when I bought the 4Runner, I knew that I was going to need a rack for the top of the truck to be able to haul these boats and gear to go do all the different adventures that I want to do. And when I was searching 4Runners and roof racks, I came across some really incredible overland vehicles that just kind of inspired me. I had always seen old Land Cruisers and things like that people would use for overland vehicles, but I'd never seen somebody use a 4Runner this way. And I had one. So it just became a thing. I ordered that roof rack that day, and I don't think I've stopped ordering things to help facilitate adventure with this truck, and just continued to build it, and it became what it became.
I love it. So it just started as a forerunner, and you just
Mhm.
started adding things to it. And I remember when we were backpacking together, you were talking about how like you're just not somebody that would typically spend money on a vehicle, but this thing just happened.
Yeah, I think I was raised with some really fiscally responsible parents,
Yeah.
and anybody that was driving around their vehicle with wheels on their car had more money than they knew what to do with, according to some of my
Sure.
parents.
Sure.
And so I kind of had adopted that mental philosophy that if I had money to buy wheels on my car when I already had perfectly good wheels on my car, I was just kind of wasting money. But I had a unique experience after I had purchased the roof rack. I saw a Forerunner that had some really cool wheels on it that were larger.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed them, and they were probably, I think they were about $1,200 or something
Yeah.
for this set of wheels.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my brother-in-law about it, and he was like, well, let me call those guys. He's in the video production world, and he had done some film shooting for them. He said, I'll call them and see what they can do. And they basically told me that they would give them to me at less than 50% shipped to my door. So they were going to be about $600, which was an incredible deal for that. But still was $600 and a pair of rims when I already had a perfectly good set of wheels on my truck. And randomly, somebody gave me a gift for a thank you gift, and it was $600.
Oh man, the universe is conspiring for you.
I got it that same day that my brother-in-law said, I can get you these rims for $600. And I got this random check that I didn't have accounted for anything, for $600. So it's a pretty easy decision at that point.
The universe spoke to you. I love it. Oh man. So I'm sure you could probably tell by the smile on my face the excitement I have for that truck. But the funny thing you and I had some more conversation about is this idea, like, it is a cool truck. It looks cool. And so my question is, like, does it start with sort of, I don't mean this in a negative way, but like the vanity of a cool truck, or does it start with like, I want to have a truck so I can go on adventure? Like which one comes first?
I think for me, it was, I'm trying to facilitate a great adventure.
Yeah.
After I built it, I would come out of the store and there'd be people standing around my truck taking pictures or doing things. And that part was fun. It was not something that I had ever really thought about. It was really the adventure is what I was thinking about. And then, yes, it became a really neat car that is a lot of fun, and a lot of people seem to enjoy it. And that gives me a lot of joy as well. So
it's so fun when you can share it. It's just interesting. I had Bill Barty at Jesse Brown's on the show, and I think you know him.
To that podcast.
Yeah, and he was talking about how, like, we have a lot of professionals here in Charlotte that go to work and they're at the bank, or they work in a hospital or whatever, and they're doing their day jobs, but they love to come into the store and buy their Patagonia gear and the North Face gear and wear that so they can kind of feel like an identity of adventure, even though that's not necessarily how they live their day-to-day life, because they want that feeling of adventure. And so sometimes when you don the gear, it inspires you to go do the adventures. And I mean, I'll admit,
100%.
I'm a perfect example. So I drive a GMC truck, and a couple of years ago, I just, on a whim, because I wanted to, I put some chunky tires on it. And like when I put those chunky, I mean, and it's kind of ridiculous. We live in Charlotte. It doesn't snow here. Like, you don't need 4-wheel drive. But like, ever since I got those tires, it makes me want to go out and use them. And so like, for me, like, just being honest, the vanity like inspired me. Like, if I'm going to have those tires, I might as well go out and do some adventure. And, this podcast does the same thing for me. As I hear people's adventures, like, it makes me want to go out and do it as well. So it's pretty cool that you've created such a cool thing. And, that car, like, I see you driving around, I'm like, oh man, there he goes. And it just gets me fired up, wanting to get out in the woods.
It feels like an adventure just going to the grocery store sometimes.
It does. I love it. Yeah. So cool. All right. So, but this truck is not about vanity for you. And you took this thing on an epic. I mean, you've been on several adventures with it, but one really that was epic. And I'd love for you to tell us about that. Can you just kind of hit the highlights of it first, and then we'll go deep into
Sure.
some of the stuff that happened along the way?
Yeah. Well, if it's okay, let me give you just a little background, kind of
Yeah.
inspiration for my trip. Was my father. And excuse me, I didn't know that was going to be something that choked me up a little bit. He
Let it flow.
was my Indiana Jones. You know, he was the coolest adventurer I ever knew. And from a very young age, he took me to go do all kinds of different adventures. And he retired and then immediately got diagnosed with Alzheimer's and didn't get to do a lot of different things that I don't know if he had hoped and dreamed, but I had hoped and dreamed for him that he had the opportunity to do. And so shortly after, I recognized that he was pretty sick, and he was at the point where he couldn't even go ride along and go camping with me anymore. It would give him too much anxiety.
Yeah.
And I just thought, you know, maybe one day I might get Alzheimer's. And there's a lot of things that I want to experience. And so I'm going to go do it. And decided that I wanted to go see the country. I have spent most of my life here in the Southeast and done minimal traveling around the country. And so I decided I was going to drive across the country and see all the things that I had wanted to see. And so then the cliff notes are that I took about 6 weeks off of work. It took me about a year to plan to have that much time away and take a sabbatical and have my clients okay with that. And I started building the truck. Again, not realizing what overlanding was or even what my trip was going to look like. It started as I'm going to go camping across the country because that's what I can afford to do. And I'll drive and I'll find a campsite at night. So that was the inspiration for my trip. And it evolved over the year as my truck evolved, as I continued to build it and plan to have the best really the best facility. I'm in the building world, so that's the word I use. The best tool to facilitate me living and traveling across the country for 6 weeks and doing adventure. So that was the inspiration, and that is really the big trip. So
yeah, it's really impactful. So how long were you sort of planning this trip before the day you actually got in the car? Like, when did it go from sort of idea, and kind of that I'm going to do this to the moment that you got in the car to leave?
It was pretty close to a year. I had a couple of contracts with clients that ended at a specific time. And so I knew when those ended, I was going to have a break. So as I was onboarding new clients, I onboarded them for 6 weeks later and said, yes, I'm happy to do this work as long as we can start at this date. And all of them said that was fine. And I started building my truck on the weekends and evenings and doing different things to it, and really trying to decide places that I wanted to go. And I took an old atlas that I had from when I was a young kid that had all the national parks in it. And I flipped through and just looked at what was where. And I circled a lot of different places that I thought that I would want to go. Realized that a lot of them weren't anywhere close to each other. So I figured I would just have to drive to those places. And somewhere along the way, as I was building my truck and discovered what overlanding was, I found websites from other folks that have done overlanding and similar trips, and they had put together files, GPX files that show locations of where they have been and explained their routes. And there were two trails in particular that I came across. One is called the Georgia Traverse, and it leads from the east side of North Georgia to the west side of North Georgia, and is about 60% unpaved roads. And so it leads through Forest Service roads through the back country. Some of it is just simple gravel roads, and then there's rivers that you have to drive across to be able to continue on the Georgia Traverse as well.
Yeah.
And then there is another trail that I came across called the Trans-America Trail.
Mm-hmm.
Which was the Trans-America Trail was put together by, I believe, some dual sport motorcycle riders. And originally it led from West Virginia down through North Carolina, all the way across the country, and eventually hits the state of Washington. Now I think they've extended it, and it starts further up than West Virginia, and I think it goes into Canada. But I started my trip at the Georgia Traverse, and somewhere along the way in Georgia, the Trans-America Trail and the Georgia Traverse merged.
Mm-hmm.
So as I got to the west side of Georgia, I continued on the Trans-America Trail all the way through. I stayed on the Trans-America Trail until I got into Moab, and then I picked a few other routes on the way.
Yeah.
But it was the Trans-America Trail is 90% unpaved roads. So it leads all the way across the country, and 90% of it is gravel roads. And again, some of those are smooth Forest Service roads or farm roads that are just dirt or gravel farm roads, and you're just driving through the country. Oklahoma, you can see it. The grid lines of these dirt roads between farms, and you're just cruising. And then sometimes you are in 4-wheel drive going through a 3-foot deep mud hole, crossing a river. And sometimes you come across a tree that has fallen in your road, and you've got to figure out how to either get around it or remove it. And that was the journey.
Why is that so cool, man? Does that just take us back to childhood, or like, what is it about like going through 3-foot mud holes and, having to go around trees, or, you and me had just a very, very minor little taste when we went camping. We had to stop, and there was a log that had fallen across the road, and we had to jump out of the car and move it to keep going up to the top of the parking lot. And I don't know, there's like something cool about that. It's just like, oh, okay, we got to move this obstacle out of the way if we want to keep going.
I mean, I think that in our world, there's so many modern conveniences. If a tree falls across the road, there's a public service that comes and takes care of that, usually before you even realize it. There's a gas station on every corner. There's a quick food place everywhere. There's a bathroom at every gas station or quick service place. And I think there's a certain amount of joy that comes with being self-sufficient and not relying on all those things. There's a certain amount of joy that comes with getting away from the life that, we've created for ourselves with all the conveniences, and figure out how to do that yourself on your own or with a small group of people. The food tastes better when you're out in the woods and you cook it on your little teeny stove.
Yeah.
It doesn't taste the same when you cook that exact same meal at home. It is way better in the wilderness. And I think that that's just true about a lot of things. The conversations are better. It's just great. There's a lot less distractions out there.
Yeah. So the joy and self-sufficiency, and I think that's a good segue, because you had like on that trip, you had a lot of experiences, like unexpected things that came up, and, gave you plenty of opportunities to prove that you were self-sufficient. Like, before we jump into that first one, just for the listeners, how much of this trip were you like on your own versus with other people?
So I did a 6-week trip, and 50% of it I was by myself, and 50% of it I had some friends along the way. So I had a good buddy from Ohio fly out to California, and he drove back across the country with me on my way back for a week. And I had another good buddy spend 9 days with me, and we went through Yosemite and the Mojave Desert in Arizona together. And I also spent a little bit of time at my brother-in-law and my sister's house in Arizona. And my brother-in-law is also very adventurous. And so we spent a lot of that time driving around the desert and exploring some neat places in Arizona. But for 3 weeks, I was by myself. And I think that was some of the best time that I had. There were days where I just drove with the window rolled down, the radio was off, and I didn't miss the radio. I had lots of conversations in my head, lots of time to process things, and it was really pleasant. I never felt lonely. There was always something new to see and new to do, and like you said, a new random challenge.
Right.
So I was
So what's going on in that alone time? You said lots of time for processing stuff going on in your head. I'm sure there's probably some chatter moments and then some just peace moments. What's going on during those 3 weeks?
I think all of the above. I mean, when you remove yourself from all the modern conveniences and you're out there and it's, just you and whatever resources you have, I think probably the best way for me to describe it is there's a lot less distractions from where I want to be and what I desire to be. During the day, there's a phone call I don't want to take, or there's an email I don't want to send, or, and I love my work. I don't mean that I don't, but when you're out there by yourself and the agenda is mine completely, and I'm in control of it, I don't know. There's less distractions from the things that are important to you, and the things that are important to you rise to the surface. There's this old saying that like an idle mind is the devil's playground, right? And I would say I probably had some of those moments where I was out there. I was like, ooh, maybe that's not really the kind of thing that I want to think about. However, most of the time, that mind wasn't very idle. I thought about my children and my relationship with my children and my spouse and my friends and what I wanted to do with work. Thought about the things that inspired me. It was just really good time. Just really good time to get to know myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think now just because you let in there is a good time, as good as time to any. Like I'd be curious for you to talk about sort of how like this trip has changed you, like what, and I mean, especially in that alone time, like what at the end of all that, especially the alone time, like how did Will become different during that time?
I think I really appreciated that alone time. I have 4 kids. I was one of 4 kids. I got married very young. There's not been a lot of time for just Will to spend with Will. So this was one of the first times I'd really spent any time by myself. And, you and I talked about journaling and a few other things. I think that time by yourself to process what's going on in your life, the things that you do like and don't like, what made you feel good, what didn't make you feel good, is just super important and makes you a healthier and better person to all the people that you're around when you do that. And so I think that is good. And I'm very intentional about spending time by myself and processing those things. And I'm really working on journaling.
Good
things that try to do in my alone time. But I feel like that makes me, when I'm healthier and better, that makes me a better father and a better friend and those things. So, it's just really understanding me and what makes me work. And I'm an evolving person, so that changes.
Yes, we all are for sure. So, all right, well, take me to Arizona, because I think that's where the story that I most loved on our trip. Take me to Arizona and tell me about some of the adventures you had in your truck.
Well, I think I'll just get right to it. The thing we're talking about is on my trip, there were lots of incredible experiences. I came across a tree that was down across the road, and fortunately I had a chainsaw and I had to spend a couple hours with a random gentleman that I met in the woods doing that. But
all right, hold on, time out, because I got for the listeners, like, this is overlanding, right? Driving across country with a chainsaw, right?
Yeah.
Most people don't keep a chainsaw in their truck, but that's what overlanding is about.
I think that now this is one of those opportunities where it was less about facilitating adventure and more that I wanted a cool chainsaw.
Yeah.
But as I went through an overlanding checklist, chainsaw was one of the things that was on the checklist, and I really wanted a chainsaw and had some tree work to do. So buy a new chainsaw. And I do have to say, people look at my car and I have all these different tools and things. I used every single thing that I purchased, including the chainsaw,
Yes.
cutting down a tree. But back to Arizona,
Yeah.
I went to Arizona to visit my brother-in-law, and I also at this point in time had one of my best friends, Brian, with me.
Mhm.
And both of these guys are adventurers as well. They've been doing adventures their entire life. My brother-in-law is in the film industry and has made some films about adventures. And then my other good friend and I have done tons of adventuring, kayaking, and rock climbing together. And he is a paramedic and a flight medic. So I had a really great team of people with me that are very adventurous. And also I felt really safe. I had really good medical professionals and
Yep.
as well as other resourceful folks with me. And we went to drive up. There's a pretty famous trail called, I think it's called the Back Road to Kings. I'm trying to say Kings Canyon. It's King something, King Crown King. That's what it is.
There you go.
It's the Back Road to Crown King. And it is a off-road trail that's pretty assertive to drive up. And we drove up, and when you get to Crown King, there's a small town that has another road to get to it, but even the mailman has a 4-wheel drive vehicle that delivers mail up there. It's a small community.
Yeah.
And on the way down, we went down a different trail, and we traveled through a canyon. I believe it was called Bumblebee Canyon. It's a really neat little place. You're out in the desert. We were in the middle of a super bloom, which apparently happens every 6 or 7 years in the desert. And so there was gorgeous flowers. It's really just an incredibly beautiful experience. And as you come through Bumblebee Canyon, there are old remnants of gold mines. And every now and then you'll see somebody in their 4-wheel drive vehicle on the side of the river panning for gold. And just a gorgeous place. Lots of saguaro cactuses out there. Yeah. But as you come down, you have to cross over the river probably 7 or 8 times to get all the way down this road. And it's relatively deep at times. And we got to a place where you were supposed to cross the river and then drive around an obstacle and come back across the river. And I decided I just wanted to take a shortcut and drive straight down the river. So I got on the radio to my buddies and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you guys think? And they were like, oh, we 100% support that decision. So I turned and started driving down this river, and it got deeper and deeper, and the water started to come over the hood of my vehicle, and then it started to come back up, and I was like, great, I'm doing just fine. And all of a sudden I just felt the bottom of the river get really soft, and the truck just kind of sunk right in and was not going anywhere. So the water, I looked down at the floorboards and the water started coming in, and I quickly gathered my laptop and all these things and trying to put them up higher in the vehicle to protect that. But water filled up my vehicle and got up to the top of the seats. I did have a winch and some really great tools that I had purchased, but other than, watching a few YouTube videos and figuring out how to install them, I'd never used them before.
Yeah.
And my winch was underwater because my bumper was underwater.
And you said you had radioed your buddies. So they're on, I think you said they're on like ATVs or something.
Yeah. My brother-in-law has a Razor, which is
a
large ATV. And we had some ham radios that we were using to talk back and forth to each other and communicate. At this point, they were standing on the side of the river with their mouths open. My brother-in-law was like, you just better get it through your head that you just turned your car into a $60,000 paperweight. And, I guess when your vehicle's in the middle of the river and you're in the middle of the desert and you're 10 miles away from a paved road, you can either sit there and cry about it, or you can start to do something. And fortunately, between me and my buddies, other than my brother-in-law talking the trash through the process, everybody was about the task at hand.
Yeah.
And we figured out, it took us about an hour and a half, but we did eventually get my truck out of the river. And
so what did it take? How did you have to do that?
So you're in the desert. There's not really many trees in the desert. And we were in the middle of a river, and there weren't very many rocks. So there were not very many things to attach my truck to pull it out. And the Razor ATV was not something strong enough to pull it out. So we found a few small rocks and hooked the winch up to it. First moved a few rocks instead of moving the vehicle.
Yeah.
But eventually we got it and moved, and we had to kind of reposition the winch attachment a few times, and we got it so that 3 of the 4 tires were out of the river and the water was draining and the car wouldn't work anymore. Was very grateful that the battery continued to power the winch.
Yes.
The underwater winch. But we got it out, and I ended up spending the night in the truck in the middle of the desert while my buddy and brother-in-law left. They came back the next day with a Jeep that my brother-in-law had borrowed. And in the middle of this, I was like, let's just call a tow company. We're out here in the middle of nowhere. I was prepared to just pay whatever to get my truck out of there. And my brother-in-law was like, absolutely not. We're doing this ourselves. We will get this out of here. So I showed up the next day with a Jeep, and we were able to tow it about 10 miles until we got to paved road. And it was some pretty aggressive 4-wheel driving that we were towing me through.
Back through any rivers?
What's that?
Did you have to go back through any rivers?
I did not have to cross any more rivers. I don't believe. If we did, there was maybe a small shallow area.
Yeah.
There were definitely areas that were like just up and over, and you're being towed. And one place where we were coming down this big bumpy hill, and because my truck didn't work, I didn't have power brakes. So I'm standing on the brake pad with, to both feet as I'm going down, just hoping that I don't run into the back of the Jeep. But we got it out, and we put it on a U-Haul trailer and took it to a shop in Arizona, in Phoenix. And they flushed all the fluids, which fortunately did not have any water in it, which is a really great sign. And they replaced one fuse, and it cranked back up, and everything was great.
Amazing.
It was amazing. So I think I spent about $800 or so at the shop in Phoenix. And then we took the car back to my brother-in-law's house, and we had a carpet shampooer where we sucked as much moisture as we possibly could out of the seats, and repacked and reorganized all the stuff in the truck, and then got back on the road to head to LA to drop my buddy at the airport. And as soon as we got into the middle of the Mojave Desert, I was going 70 miles an hour. There's no car around, and I have no phone signal. My car just died. It just shut off. And I'm just coasting down the highway going, what am I going to do now? So, I thought I had the challenge and the adventure resolved, and it continued. And so we were in the middle of the desert. I had no phone signal with me and my buddy, who had a flight 6 hours later. And I hitchhiked east about 30 miles to a U-Haul that happened to have a truck. I actually got picked up on the side of the road by a gentleman who is a subcontractor for U-Haul, and he repaired their vehicles. And so he had a computer in his car that allowed him to look up and see where vehicles and trailers were available.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Convenient.
I don't know how you get that fortunate when you're in the middle of the desert, but really great guy. And he drove me, and I rented a truck. My buddy got some phone signal, called a tow truck to take my car 45 miles the opposite direction to a U-Haul location that had a trailer. And they showed up with a U-Haul with a tow truck and tried to pick up my truck, and my truck was too heavy for the tow truck. So he had to get a different tow truck got it to the U-Haul place. I drove there. We loaded everything up, put it on the trailer, and headed to LA. And we missed his flight, of course, but we did still get to LA that day. The adventure continued. I Googled Spanish-speaking import electric car repair or something like that. I was trying to figure out how I was going to get this fixed economically.
Yeah.
And the folks in Arizona had said that if they replaced my computer, it was going to be a couple of grand. And I got to LA and found this shop, and they found a used computer for $300 and installed it for $600. And a couple of days later, I was back on the road, and I haven't had a single problem with it since.
It's crazy. And how long ago was that?
It was right at 3 years ago.
3 years ago, and you're still driving around in that amazing truck.
Yeah, and it's amazing, but if you go up and you look at it, it is scratched up, it's dented up.
Yeah, but those are war wounds, man. Those are awesome.
I love every single one of those scratches and dents. I've earned them, and they all have their own little story with them.
Every single one. So one thing when you were telling me the story, when we were backpacking, like you created this visual for me. You had mentioned that you were in the river, like probably at the lowest moment where you had just gotten stuck. And it was like, I mean, I'm stuck. Like, what in the world am I going to do now? And it was like, kind of like probably the bottom moment. But yeah. I don't remember if you said, but you said your friend, I think it was your friend or somebody commented that at that moment they looked at you and you had the biggest smile on your face.
Really, what had happened was I was just like you said. Vehicle was in the middle of the river. I had taken my boots off because I had leather boots on and threw them on top of my truck, and I'm barefooted and I'm standing in the middle of the river. And my brother-in-law is in the film production industry, and he takes a camera everywhere he goes, and he was getting great footage. So we've got great video footage of me sinking my truck. And in the moment where he was telling me that I better get through my thick skull, that I just turned my truck into a paperweight, he was taking some pictures, and he took a picture of me. The next day, he sent me some of the pictures that he had taken. And there's a picture of me standing in the middle of the river, maybe 30 minutes after my truck has sunk. It's still in the river. And I have in that photo the best smile on my face. I actually look happier than I had ever seen myself before when I saw that picture. It actually made me cry. Like, here I am in this moment where I'm in the middle of the river with the truck sunk. And, I was just completely happy being out in the wilderness with great friends, doing something challenging together, figuring out how to make it happen on our own. And we did. We were completely successful, if you're willing to call a sunk vehicle in a river successful. It is one of the best days of my life. I had such a great time. And
do you remember that moment? Like the photo obviously said you were happy. Like, do you remember that moment? Do you remember feeling it?
I do. I don't remember being very stressed at that moment. I remember feeling like there was a challenge. I would think I was more concerned about getting my buddy to his flight on time, because that had implications on the rest of his normal life. And so I think if there was anything that I was concerned about, it was that. On this adventure, when I went on this adventure, I think I was prepared to lose my vehicle. That's not what I wanted to do.
Sure.
But the adventure was the inspiration. The vehicle was a tool to make that adventure happen. The adventure was the goal. I love my truck. It's a lot of fun. It allows me to do some really cool things.
Yeah.
But it's still a truck,
Well, and I think for people that are listening, you've been an adventurer your whole life. Your dad got you started. You talked about that. And you've experienced lesser setbacks over the course of your adventure. And so there was kind of a build up to that. It wasn't like you just, had no experience and all of a sudden you're thrown out there and you just have this death wish. That's not the case. Like you've been preparing for that your whole life. I think the other thing that's really important is that you mentioned you were with two people that have extensive experience. You're with a paramedic, a flight medic. I mean, you're with people that like know what to do in a crisis. And so like you mentioned that like you felt safe, and that's important. This is not like an adrenaline, like, let's just take this like wild risk where anything could happen. Like you knew you knew that you had help there. And I think that's a huge thing for people to hear.
One of the things that my dad taught me, and I can remember this very clearly, one of these conversations, he took me rock climbing and rappelling. And actually this conversation was at the base of the chimneys out at Table Rock. He was teaching me how to rock climb. And I remember him saying something along the lines of, everything that you do, son, is a risk, but they're all calculated risks. And before you climb this rock face, you need to understand what the risks are associated with you doing that. And he told me that I needed to understand all the knots that were tied so that I knew that I was safe, and that I needed to, if somebody else tied one, that I should look behind it and verify that they did it so that I knew what risk I was doing. And I've done a lot of risky things in my life, but I don't consider myself really a risky person, because I tend to evaluate. Maybe that's some of the stuff I spend thinking about in my silent time, is what all could go wrong. And I know what could go wrong before I start doing it typically. And I'm okay with that consequence. Even if it's not the outcome that I want, I'm okay with it, because I know that's a risk to be able to do what I'm doing. Or you don't do it.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. But so just bring it back to your dad, because you just mentioned him. You called him your Indiana Jones.
Yeah. He was the best. I mean, he was the best adventurer ever.
Yeah. You think Dad was with you on that trip?
He, in so many ways, for sure. He's with me everywhere. Yeah. I think that, I was up in Linville Gorge a few weeks before we were, and I was sitting at an overlook and just breathed in, and I could smell and taste the outdoors, and it was my dad, so
yeah, it's awesome, man. Well, you're keeping the legacy going, that's for sure.
Good.
Yeah, proud to know you, friend.
Thanks.
So listen, people that listen to this podcast is about inspiring others to get outside, and you're a huge inspiration to me. And I think we had some great conversation during our backpacking trip, and you told me about some of the great places in North Carolina. And the place that you took us to, excuse me, for that trip was breathtaking, Linville Gorge. And so I just want to ask you, for those that are listening, if they kind of feel that nudge to get outside, but they experience like any fears or doubts, or just kind of get those, that chatter in their head that says, no, I can't do that. That's not for me. Like, what advice would you have for those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of great things happen when you push yourself to the edge of what you're comfortable with. When you take yourself out of your comfort zones, really are the times that you develop character and really just kind of, you learn a lot through navigating through challenges. And I would say that when you go on these adventures, there's a series of challenges. Sometimes it's discomfort of being cold, or your legs being tired, or whatever it is. But there's something about pushing through those things and knowing that you're a very capable person that is incredibly rewarding. And there are so many incredible things to see that you don't get to see just driving down the road. That, these days there are easy day trips and day hikes and ways to explore, even right here inside Charlotte. I just would encourage you to get outside and go do that. There's great places like Bill Barty's group over at Jesse Brown's. You can walk in there and say, hey, I'm interested in going on a really short, quick adventure and get my toes wet. And those guys can tell you about everything that you need and help set you up with everything that you need. And you probably already have the majority of the things that you need, because it doesn't really take much. And I just would say go out and do it. So many great, wonderful things to go see that we don't get to experience driving around town. It would just do it.
So true. Just get outside and do it. All right. So Will, like, especially this adventure in the river, right? I mean, that's just going to be one scene, but Hollywood's going to make a movie about you at some point. And that's just going to be one scene in the movie. But I want to know, when they do make the movie about you, who's going to be the actor that plays you?
I appreciate the heads up on this, because it was not a very easy decision, but I thought about this for a while. I think Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh, nice. Awesome. I love that too, because when we were backpacking, we went right by the spot that you said was part of the movie Last of the Mohicans. So yeah, that's great. Daniel Day-Lewis, man.
Actually, my brother is the one that suggested that one. And as I went and looked back at some of the movies and whatever that he had done, I felt like that was a great option.
Oh, that's a great one. So what's your movie going to be called?
Embrace the Wild.
Ooh, Embrace the Wild, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. Man, I'm gonna watch that movie for sure. Well, and Will, I hope maybe you could share a few pictures with the listeners so we can see some of your adventures and some of the encounters that you've had. That'd be awesome. We could throw those on the show notes.
Absolutely. I'll send some over to you. And then if anybody would like, I don't have a very active Instagram, but I do have an Instagram that's @n.c.wild. And I usually, I only post adventure stuff on there. So
cool.
Usually it's related to my vehicle, not me. So if you go on Instagram at n.c.wild, you can check out my journey and see all kinds of fun pictures.
We'll post a link to that as well in the show notes. So for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope that Will's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or you need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Will, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's great.